Edge systems, and we're going to be talking about DITA and localization today. So a brief overview of what we're going to be looking at today. Just some additional housekeeping before we get in. Today's slides that we're going to be going through today, they're already at slideshare.net. So if you're looking for a copy of these slides, you can download them from there at any time. I'm also going to be giving you a URL at the end of this session that will talk about the concepts that we'll be looking at today in more detail. So don't worry about getting all the details down. The records are going to be all.
Has joined the conference.
And we do apologize. There seems to be some kind of change in the WebEx session, so you're going to hear these announcements when people join the teleconference today. There doesn't seem to be anything that we can do about that. So today we'll be talking, as is our custom,
has joined the conference.
Use adjust systems, and then we're going to be looking at what it means to do localization if you're using XML, or in particular if you're using DITA, the Darwin Information Typing Architecture dialects of XML. So it's going to be, kind of end-to-end, with how you're going to store things, how you're going to keep content in one language separate from content in another language. We're going to look at guidelines for writing, in other words, what you can tell your writers on your team so that people write in a way that's kind of conducive to clean and cost-effective localization. We're going to give you some tips for working with translators, and we're going to look at some tool issues, and in particular, what tool issues tend to be the ones that take more time than people often think they will. So it falls into what's new. Just a few items this month. One of them is that after about 3.5 years of work, the OASIS DITA Technical Committee has finally released and gotten approved the DITA 1.2 specification. So as you may know, XML is supporting DITA 1.2 currently through an optional configuration kit, which is a free upgrade to XML 6, and will be officially supporting DITA 1.2 in our next major release as well. If anybody out there is using McAfee antivirus, there is a known conflict between McAfee antivirus and XML. You can really improve the stability of XML if you're using McAfee antivirus. If you download a free patch that's also available for that, so we want to get the word out that patch is available. And we'd like to welcome a new team member. We've got Dana Francie working in marketing with us now. So welcome to Dana. Welcome to Dana. And those of you who are on our partner program will probably be getting some emails from Dana, and maybe have a chance to meet her at some point as well. So let's look at DITA and localization. So very briefly, let's summarize why people would consider using DITA or consider using XML for localization. And the overall story is that you're going to be able to get your localized content out faster, and you can channel those cost and time savings often into reaching a wider audience. So one of the main reasons for that is that with an XML-based system as opposed to a traditional publishing system, when your content comes back from your translators, you don't have to sit there and spend a day or 2 days doing desktop publishing for each language. You don't have to do manual layout of every page. And that's because with an XML-based publishing system, your page layout is going to be automated through style sheets and through custom publishing configuration. So when the content comes back from your translators, you just push a button, push it through the system, and then just do a sanity check of your results at the end. Another reason that XML helps with localization is that you're likely to be writing in topics, which means that you're writing in small units of content. And that means that instead of sending an entire book over to translators, you can send over topics as they become ready.
Has joined the conference.
Another reason that XML is helpful is that with an XML system, you can often reuse your content more. You can have less duplication of your content, and that naturally leads to less content to translate. So what this leads to is that you can get your your content in your other languages then at about the same time as the content in your original language, which means that you can ship your product simultaneously if you're a product manufacturer, and that means that you can do your announcements worldwide instead of there's this big hype of your product's been released in the U.S. and Europe's going to have to wait another month for it. That's nobody wants to do that anymore these days. What people want to do is sim ship in multiple languages. People have reported with XML efficiency gains, so time savings 30 to 50%. And what some people are doing is that they're taking those cost savings, taking those efficiency gains, and they're using it to grow their market by delivering in more languages. Because once you've got a system set up and you know what localization is like for one or two languages, adding your 12th language is just a little bit more additional work, depending on what the language is. So let's look at how you would get there. So one of the first questions that people have is just trying to get a sense in their mind of how the content is stored, how you keep the content separate from each other. And if you are writing in English and translating to another language,
has joined the conference,
mixing up content from different languages in the same file. So in the simple case of every deliverable is going to be in a single language, what you would do is you would create parallel folder systems. So in English, your folders might look like this, and in French you would have a copy of the same folder structure, and it would look exactly the same. Maybe your absolute top level folder will be named differently, but within your folders, all of your folders are going to be the same, all of your folder structures are going to be the same, and all of your file names are going to be the same. The reason that we strongly encourage having folder and file names the same is that if you're in XML systems, links between files rely on file names. So if you have a link that works in English, it's going to also work in French as long as your file names are all the same. So the next thing that you're going to do is use a particular attribute to indicate what language your content is in. And you need to put this attribute on every file, and this will help your publishing system understand what language to publish your content in, and it will help help you find your content and keep track of your content more easily as well. So at the top, at the root of every XML file, you can put what's called an attribute on the file, and you can put a language code into that file. Okay? And then, other than this language attribute, everything else is going to be the same. So all of the element names, all of the attribute names, all of the attribute values, everything throughout the file is going to be exactly the same, except this language code at the top, and of course the actual content of your file. And then, so you've got your content, your folder and file structures are parallel. Your structural markup is exactly the same. The only things that are different are this language code at the top of the file and your actual content. And with that, the beauty of an XML system is that your publishing system can produce production quality output, and it can adjust the output for each language. So things that you can adjust for each language are, for example, you can have the publishing system look at that language code at the top of the file and change the font. You can have it change how indexes are sorted, and you can have it change what's called generated text within the file. So in English, this instruction that's marked with attention, colon, in French is going to be automatically marked with the word attention translated into French, which is avertissement. Okay? So what's happening is that your publishing system is configured with a list of what to put in the English content, for this kind of note element. And the French and the publishing system is also configured with a list of strings that say what to put into French content that's using this element. Okay, so that's just a big picture of how things work. You've got your content stored in parallel files and folders. You've got your XML length attribute at the top of the file, and your publishing system can do language-specific things with it. So let's look now quickly at some guidelines for writing. So I'm going to throw out just a few tips that in this part of the session. So tip number 1, XML markup consists of mostly what's called elements and attributes. And sometimes you've got a choice in, whatever XML language you have of using either an element or an attribute to say the same thing. A classic example of this is that in an image element, you can either put alternative text for the image into an element that's called the alt element, or you can put it in an attribute called the alt attribute. And basically, your localization system is going to work a lot better if you use elements. And we recommend, with just one tiny exception, that you don't put anything that you need to translate into an attribute value, because translation software often doesn't allow translators to translate attribute values. And even if your translation software does allow you to translate attribute values, there's a lot of things in your content that will basically break if you do change the attribute values. You really want to have attribute values like this word attention. Tell your translators to never translate it, because if they go translate it, it's just going to, your file's going to be invalid, or it's not going to publish properly. Okay? So as a general rule, ask your translators to not translate attribute values, and don't put anything that needs to be translated into an attribute value. Tip number 2 is for inline elements. So an inline element is something that appears within within a sentence, basically within within a paragraph. And for that, one of the things that's important is to remove extra spaces. And another thing we recommend is to use a semantic element instead of an element that specifies formatting. So this might sound a bit esoteric, so I'll just switch over to XML so I can give you a simple example. Okay, so here, for example, if I have, I can make this word bold, okay? One of the things that we recommend is that there are many ways that you can make something bold in DITA, and we recommend that you use the method that's or the element type that's as specific as possible. So, for example, I just made that bold, and that does work. That is styled as being bold. I can also use a UI control element, which in this particular demonstration looks exactly the same as if I was using the bold element. Okay, UI control or bold, it all looks the same. And that's because this is how my style sheet is set up in English. In other languages, however, UI control, user interface control may not be styled in bold at all. And it may, for example, need to be styled as if it has brackets around it. These brackets here. Okay, and you want to make sure that if it is translated in a way that is going to end up having brackets around it, that you don't have the space in the wrong place. Okay. So if there's going to be a space coming after a particular term, make sure that the space is after the element, not before, or after the element, not within the element. Okay, so watch extra spaces because you may need to use something like brackets or parentheses of some kind in some languages. We get a lot of questions about how to put images into XML files, especially images with callouts in them. And so there's basically two ways that you can do it. This method that we're showing here is the simplest method. This is using numbered callouts. So what you would do is you would take your image file, you would put these, use an image editor such as Photoshop to just put these bubbles on it with numbers, and then in your actual XML content, somewhere else in your document, you will have a legend saying what these numbers refer to. Okay, so this is by far the simplest method, probably the more widely used method for meeting the need to have callouts that can be translated into different languages. There's lots of other ways that you can deal with callouts and that can be translated. Probably the second most common way is to use SVG in your images. So you can SVG is a particular image format which actually mixes text data and image data into the same file. So within one single file, I can put the text of the callouts, into that SVG file, and then when it's time to translate this, I can send this whole SVG file over to my translator along with the rest of my content, and they can translate that. This is, nicer in terms of results, in the sense that you can get kind of more, you can bring your text closer to what it's describing, whereas this kind of requires the end user to look at the image, look at the legend, look at the image, look at the legend. So this is a little bit of a better result. It does require more setup work in your publishing system, however. Would like to talk a bit about index markers, glossary entries. One of the things that you change, or one of the things that changes between languages is how things are sorted. And one of the things that's challenging about Asian languages is that there isn't necessarily a method of sorting things that's as obvious as sorting an alphabet-based language. So for Japanese and Chinese, you need to use a particular element in DITA to indicate how things are going to be sorted if you've got index markers.
Have left the conference.
If you've got glossary entries in DITA and you need to sort those as well, you may actually need to create a new element type to indicate how things should be sorted. And finally, one last tip is that there's a really nice capability of XML which lets you say what should be translated and what parts of your document should be translated and what parts of your document should not be translated. So, for example, if you're using an element type called code block, which is generally used for putting in, programming source code, you don't have to. You can actually tell your translator to never translate anything that's in a code block element. Okay, that's kind of one of the big headaches of working with the translators when they translate things that shouldn't be translated. So you can just tell your translators don't translate any elements of this type at all. On most elements, you can also set an attribute on the element to not translate the contents of the element. So, for example, on this note element, I could set an attribute on the element, and then I can tell my translators if there's any element that has translate equals no, then don't translate that content. Okay, a few more tips that have to do specifically with localization and content reuse. Most of the time when people are working in an XML-based system, they want to localize their they want to implement some kind of content reuse feature. If you're using a content reuse feature called conditional text, in which you can put multiple permutations of a document into your source files, so that you can produce multiple variations of your document from that. Remember that basically there's a few things to keep in mind if you know that you need to translate this content later. Basically, the main guideline is that if you're going to have something that's going to appear in some outputs but not others, is that you have that thing that's going to appear in one output but not others be an entire sentence. And that's because different languages often have requirements for words in a sentence to agree with each other. So if you just conditionalize a word in the middle of a sentence and that word changes between variations of your output, then it might not agree with the rest of the sentence in different languages. Okay? So if you're using these kind of advanced reuse features of DITA, you're going to basically want to use them only for entire sentences or for proper nouns. Moving along, let's look at working with translators. So rule number one, unless you want to be very, very unhappy and not get any return on investment from your XML, is that if you're working in a particular XML language such as DITA, your translator needs to work in the same XML language. The one thing that won't work, for example, is if you work in XML, your translators are still stuck in this mindset of only working with Word files. So you convert your XML files to Word and you send them to your translator, and you get Word files back from your translator. That really won't work. It's going to be an enormous pain every time you do it. And the same thing is true if you try to convert between XML languages for the most part. So if you work in say, DITA XML and your translator wants to work in XHTML, you're going to, again, have a lossy conversion every time. And things like all the work that you've done to identify what not to translate and everything, all your file paths, it will generally get screwed up. So make sure that your translator is going to work in the same XML language as you. Rule number two, which is really not a rule, it's just kind of a suggestion, is that there's a file format that's called XLIF that can make things really convenient. When you're working with XML files, you're often working with hundreds of files. And this is just a way of packaging up those files to send to a translator so that it's just a little bit neater to send these files back and forth. One other suggestion is to be careful about white space, and that's because white space often leads to issues with translation memory systems. In other words, if you didn't have a particular space there before, but you have a space now, your translation memory system can think that your text has changed when it actually hasn't changed. And translation memory systems often aren't good at, not knowing that, often not good at knowing that the content actually hasn't changed. So you might need to turn off automatic insertion of white space. So the main thing, obviously, with working with a translator is going to be to communicate the important stuff. And we've given you a little bit of a checklist of the important things. There's more about this in the article that we're going to be, I'm going to be pointing you to at the end of the session. If you're working with any kind of XML, we recommend that you give the schema or the DTD files to your translator. If you're working with DITA, we recommend that you tell your translator exactly which version of DITA that you're using, and make sure that your translator has any specialization files that you need. And remember, if you're working with reusable components in XML, that the reusable components rely on a specialized DTD file called the DITA component DTD file, and so you need to make sure that your translator has that. You're going to want to communicate with your translator about attributes and about what attribute values should be translated. Basically, there's only one attribute in DITA that ever really needs to be translated, and that's what's called nav title. That's used in DITA maps. And even that is something that should be automatically generated in many cases. And also talk about what shouldn't be translated. So give your translator a list of element types that shouldn't be translated, such as your code block elements, and make sure that they know about the translate equals no attribute. So they shouldn't translate anything that has translate equals no. They should just leave that in its original language. Okay? And also make sure that either you or your translator will be changing that XML lang attribute. So you're going to have, if you're working in English, you're going to have XML lang equals generally en-us at the top of every file, and your translator should change that in general. So the general rule of thumb is that your translator, you should give your translator clean content that works, that's valid, that has, close to perfect or close to perfect markup, and your translator should send you back exactly the same thing. So make sure that whatever you send your translator
has left the conference.
Links are fixed, the document validates, it's as clean as possible, and your translator should send you back the same thing. So I'm just going to say a few things about tools. One important thing, if you're working with any language except the really trivial ones that use exactly the same characters as English with no accent, and that's very few languages. You need to make sure that your tools are Unicode compliant. Okay, if you're working with tools that aren't Unicode compliant, what ends up happening is you get these square boxes instead of letters, or square boxes instead of Asian characters. And make sure that your authoring tools support localization-friendly markup. So you need to be able to set that XML lang attribute on every file. You need to set the translate attribute on every file, or on every element that needs it. And you also want to make sure that your authoring tool doesn't mess up your file in a way that confuses translation memory systems. One thing that a lot of our customers are quite interested in is that there's software that will actually look at the content of what you're writing, look at the words and the sentences that you're writing, and help you to write in a way that's consistent and that's kind of suitable for translation. These guidelines for writing in a translation-friendly way have been around for a long time, and now there's software that can help you with that. These tools are so the logos of the three tools that you're seeing now, they all integrate with XMetal. You can use them within your XMetal authoring environment, and you can contact these vendors, and they can kind of give you a kind of a plugin that will give you these additional features in XMetal. So the main cost when it comes to localizing DITA, there's a lot of benefits. There's also some costs. Most of the costs that you're going to incur are going to be upfront. Like your very first project is going to be, the one where you work out all of the issues of configuration. And there is a fair amount of configuration to be done for some languages. So, for example, in publishing tools, you want to make sure that your generated text strings are right. So, for example, let's see, where we saw here that the generated text string in English is different from French. You want to make sure that you've got strings for every language that you need to translate into. You need to make sure that you're using appropriate fonts, especially for the non-Latin alphabet. There's basically no font that's going to look good in every single language, for Japanese and Chinese in particular, what looks good in one language isn't going to look good in another language at all. So you're going to want to make sure that you've got your fonts configured well. You're going to want to make sure that index sorting is working in every language. Page sizes often need to change from language to language, and the help system environment may need to change in different languages. And this is often, a fair amount of investment. It's an investment that you recoup quite rapidly with, if you are localizing in multiple languages. But this is the kind of thing that you do have to think about at the early stages of an implementation. And probably of all the things that you do in your implementation, this is where expert help is going to be the most useful. So, basically, a consultant who's gone through this before is going to be really helpful in getting you through these issues and making sure that everything works in every language. In particular, there's some, if you're working with the DITA Open Toolkit, some things to know are that, the customization that you need to do in the Open Toolkit is going to be different depending on which output format you're customizing. So when you customize something for PDF output, it doesn't change how HTML output looks, and vice versa. The methods for identifying what language you're going to be publishing your content in are going to vary. So, for example, PDF output may require you to put in a parameter indicating the language in addition to, having the XML lang attribute at the top of every file. And by default, the default string files that are in the DITA Open Toolkit, some of the string files are really poor, and some of the string files contain some English strings, which can be confusing. So that's a set of things to take a look at. If you've got any kind of non-Latin character set, one thing to be aware of is that in PDF output, by default when you generate output from the Open Toolkit, it's often blank. It often doesn't contain any of the text that you would appear. And that's because in PDF output, the default behavior is for text to not appear. You actually have to go into a configuration file and declare which character ranges in Unicode you want to output. It's just the way that PDF publishing systems are designed. So to summarize, if you're using DITA for localization or really any XML language and you're localizing, the cost savings and time savings can be really huge. Okay, so just at the end there, I was talking a bit about the things that you need to configure, the things that you need to do to get your publishing system working in every language. But the glorious, wonderful thing about that is that once it's done, it's done. Once it's working, it costs the same to redeploy your output, even whether you've got an entirely new deliverable from your translator or your translator's just changed one paragraph in it. You can just redo your output, and often in a matter of minutes. So if you're a team lead implementing a localization project in XML, main things to get right. Make sure that your writers are educated about writing in a localization-friendly way. Make sure that you've got translators on board that work directly in XML. And I should mention that the tools that are available for translators to work in XML, they're user-friendly. It's not going to be an enormous burden on your translator to shift to XML. Often people don't like change, but as far as changes go, this one's not a difficult one. Make sure that your translators know what they need to translate and what to not translate. They generally shouldn't translate attribute values. They shouldn't translate the element types that you say not to not translate. and they shouldn't translate anything with that's marked as translate equals no. And finally, probably an important thing in success is that if you're using whatever publishing system that you're using, you are going to have to configure it to make sure that it works in different languages, and that's just the way that the tools are. But the people who go through this, the people who make this change to working in localization with using XML, are the people who really get probably the most benefit out of working with XML. And once they get the system implemented, there's absolutely no going back. There's it's like night and day. No more of standing over the computer for 80 hours a week trying to get content in 8 languages all published in the books at the same time. So with that, I think we're ready to wrap things up.
Terrific. Thanks, Elaine. We don't have a lot of questions today. We have one, which is, excuse me, how does XML, the question is, can you give me some idea how XML works with translation memory software from the vendors you pointed out or other vendors?
The vendors that I pointed out, I'm just going to switch back to these. These are actually not translation memory tools. They are tools for they're kind of tools that help you write. So they're not associated with storage at all, as far as I know. And in terms of translation memory tools, that's a good question. Usually we put that question to the CMS vendors. Like that's really a question of how the content management system, I would say, integrates with the translation memory tool. I don't, that short answer is I don't really know, but I know that our customers say that it works fine. Tom might have something to add.
Yeah, hi everybody, this is Tom McLeary. I think some of the things, some systems that I've seen in the past, translators will be working in a web-based environment that will show them sort of side-by-side fragments of the content from the English source document and the target document in some other language, or I guess whatever the source and target languages are. And typically those systems would have like buttons if the translator needs to go into the source XML file for some reason. Then there would be a button there besides the bit of text that you can click to launch your XML editor, like XML. So like you'd like to see the XML icon there next to the bit of translatable text.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're talking more about like a translator, like the software that the actual translator uses. I think
right.
The question is more about translation memory, which is how to identify what part, how an automated system identifies what things need to be sent to the translator in the first place.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the answer is it's so easy that our customers figure it out without asking.
Okay, everyone. So we are exactly on our 45-minute target, which is great. Thank you so much, Elaine. This is our last 37-minute webinar of 2010. We hope everyone has a fantastic holiday season. We will be back with our next set of 37-minute webinars in the new year, so keep an eye out for the email invite. And as I said, if you want to share this with anyone, it's up on our website, available for download, as is the white paper on DITA, using DITA for successful localization. Have a terrific holiday season, everyone, and we'll see you in the new year. Thank you.
Has left the conference.